You fired him at 9:12 this morning, the voice said quietly. And at 9:47, he was the only reason you're still alive. The words didn't echo yet, not here, not now, because right now the world was still moving too fast for truth to catch up. And Evelyn Carter didn't even know she was already living inside the moment that would one day silence an entire room. The city hummed beneath a pale winter sky, glass towers reflecting cold sunlight in sharp angles, and inside one of those towers on the 32nd floor, decisions were made in seconds that changed people's lives forever. We need efficiency, not excuses, Evelyn had said earlier that morning, her voice crisp, controlled, the kind of voice that didn't ask for agreement, it expected it. Your performance no longer aligns with company standards, she added, not looking up for more than a second, not long enough to see the way the man in front of her stood still instead of arguing. Understood, Marcus Hale replied, calm, steady, like a man who had heard worse and survived it. And just like that, with a signature and a nod, he was gone. Another name erased from a system that didn't remember people, only results. The elevator doors had closed with a soft chime, the kind no one ever notices, and Marcus stepped inside, hands in his jacket pockets, eyes quiet, not angry, not broken, just still, like a man who had learned that dignity doesn't raise its voice. Outside, the wind cut through the streets at 20 miles per hour, sharp enough to make people pull their coats tighter, sharp enough to remind anyone paying attention that control was always an illusion. And somewhere between that building and the next intersection, between routine and accident, between certainty and chaos, something shifted. A car stalled at the light, horns began to sound, a voice called out, "Hey, you okay?" Another answered, "Someone should do something." But no one moved, not yet, because hesitation is louder than fear in moments like these. And then without announcement, without hesitation, Marcus stepped forward, no badge, no title, no reason left to prove anything. Just a quiet decision made in less than a heartbeat. "Sir? Don't?" Someone started. "It's not safe," another warned, but Marcus didn't answer, didn't explain, didn't look back, because some things don't wait for permission, and some people don't need recognition. The air carried the sharp scent of winter asphalt and distant exhaust, the sound of tires, the low murmur of a crowd unsure whether to watch or act, and in the middle of it all, a moment unfolded that no one would fully understand until much later. Inside the stalled car, Evelyn Carter sat. Frozen for the first time that day, her breath shallow, her hands no longer steady on the wheel, control slipping in ways she had never prepared for. And when the door opened, when someone reached in, when a voice calm, grounded, unshaken said, "I've got you," she didn't recognize it, didn't place it, didn't connect it to the man she had dismissed less than an hour ago. She only knew that someone had shown up when no one else did, and that was the part no one could ignore later. Not the timing. Not the irony, not the truth that would come crashing down when everything finally slowed enough to be seen clearly. Because in less than 35 minutes, the man she decided wasn't worth keeping, became the reason she was still here at all. If you're enjoying this story, please subscribe and turn on the notification bell. It really helps the channel and means a lot to us. Now let's go on. The sirens never came, not right away, because sometimes the most important moments do not announce themselves with noise. They arrive quietly, like a breath returning to a room that forgot how to breathe, and Evelyn Carter sat there in the passenger seat now, her fingers still trembling slightly against the leather as the world outside slowly stitched itself back together. "Are you hurt?" Marcus asked, his voice even, not urgent, not panicked, just steady in a way that made the chaos feel smaller. "I am fine," she replied too quickly, the reflex of someone who had never allowed weakness to take shape in front of others. He nodded once, not arguing, not pushing, because he was not there to win a conversation, only to make sure she was safe, and for a moment neither of them spoke. The air carried the faint hum of engines restarting, distant footsteps, a few voices returning to normal as if nothing had happened, but inside that small space something lingered, something unspoken, something that did not belong to her usual world of boardrooms and balance sheets. "You should get checked," he said after a pause, simple, direct. "There is a clinic 2 blocks down." She adjusted her coat, regaining posture, regaining control, rebuilding the version of herself that never faltered. "I said I am fine," she repeated, softer this time, less command, more insistence. Marcus studied her for half a second, then stepped back, giving her space without resistance, because dignity does not force itself where it is not welcomed. "All right," he said quietly, and turned as if the moment was already complete for him. Evelyn watched him then, really watched him for the first time, the worn jacket, the steady walk, the absence of expectation, and something about that unsettled her more than the incident itself. Wait, she called, the word leaving her lips before she could filter it. He stopped but did not turn immediately. You should take this, she said, reaching into her bag, pulling out a slim leather wallet, fingers precise, controlled again. She extended a stack of bills toward him, not carelessly, but not thoughtfully either, just enough to settle what she assumed was a transaction. For your time, she added, her tone returning to something familiar, something structured. Marcus glanced at the money, then at her, and for a moment the city noise seemed to fall away again. I did not do it for that, he said, calm, no judgment, no pride, just truth. Everyone says that, she replied lightly, a faint edge beneath her words, the kind that comes from years of believing everything has a price. He shook his head once, almost imperceptibly. Not everyone means it, he answered, then turned and walked away before she could respond. Evelyn stood there, the money still in her hand, something unfamiliar tightening in her chest. Not anger, not embarrassment, something quieter, harder to define, and it stayed with her longer than she expected. Back on the 32nd floor, the glass walls reflected a version of her that had already returned to normal. Meetings resumed, assistants moved quickly, schedules recalibrated. The afternoon briefing is ready, someone said. We also need your approval on the restructuring list. Another added. Evelyn nodded, stepping into the rhythm she controlled so well. The incident reduced to a delay, a disruption, nothing more, because that was how her world worked. You moved forward, you did not look back. And yet, somewhere between the numbers and the voices, between the polished table and the city view stretching for miles, a quiet detail refused to disappear. Not the fear, not the moment, but the man who had walked away without taking anything, without asking for anything, without even making sure she remembered his name. And that was the part that did not fit, the part that would not stay silent for long. The afternoon light stretched long across the glass walls, turning the city into a reflection of itself, polished and distant, just like the world Evelyn Carter controlled with precision. Next item, she said, her voice steady again, her posture flawless, as if the morning had never happened, as if nothing had slipped through the cracks. We need final approval on the facility's contract, her assistant added, placing a folder neatly in front of her. Evelyn opened it without hesitation. Scanning numbers, timelines, names, everything reduced to efficiency, everything measurable. Cut 10%, she said almost immediately. We are not running a charity. A few executives exchanged glances, but no one challenged her. They rarely did, because she was usually right, and being right had become its own kind of armor. Across town, far from the polished floors and controlled temperatures, Marcus Hale sat on a worn wooden chair inside a small auto shop. The faint smell of oil and metal filling the air, a space where things were fixed with hands instead of decisions, where problems had weight and texture, not just numbers. Long day? The shop owner asked, wiping his hands with a rag. Marcus gave a small nod. Something like that, he replied, his tone unchanged, not heavier, not lighter, just present, because he had learned long ago that not everything needed to be explained. His phone buzzed once on the table beside him, a reminder notification, 4:30 in the afternoon, pick up Lily. He stood immediately, no hesitation, because some things in his life were not negotiable, not flexible, not subject to approval, they simply mattered. Back in the tower, Evelyn flipped to the next page, her eyes pausing briefly on a section labeled Terminated Personnel. The list was clean, efficient, names reduced to lines, decisions finalized, and there it was, Marcus Hale. She did not linger, she did not need to, because to her it was already done, already categorized, already forgotten. Approved, she said, closing the folder with a soft but final sound, the kind that left no room for reconsideration. Outside, the air had softened slightly as the day leaned toward evening, the sharp edge of winter giving way to a quieter calm, and Marcus stood near the curb outside in elementary school, hands in his jacket pockets, watching as children poured out in small waves of laughter and noise, a different kind of world, one that did not measure worth in profit margins or performance reviews. Dad? A small voice called, and just like that, everything else faded. Lily ran toward him, her backpack bouncing lightly against her shoulders, her smile unfiltered, unguarded. He crouched slightly as she reached him, steadying her with a gentle hand. You are late, she said. With mock seriousness. By 3 minutes, he replied, glancing at his watch. I will do better tomorrow. She studied him for a second, then nodded as if granting approval. Okay, she said, satisfied, because in her world, promises still meant something simple. They walked together down the sidewalk, her small hand slipping into his, a quiet rhythm forming between them, no urgency, no performance, just presence, and for a moment the noise of everything else disappeared. Miles away, high above the city, Evelyn stood by the window, looking out but not really seeing, something still unsettled beneath the surface, something that did not belong to her usual calculations, not the numbers, not the contracts, not even the morning incident, but the space left behind by a man who had walked away without asking for anything. And for the first time in a long time she found herself replaying a moment she could not quantify, could not control, could not file away, because some actions do not fit into systems, they wait quietly until the right moment to be understood. The next morning arrived without ceremony, the kind of quiet transition the world rarely notices, but inside the glass tower downtown, everything was already in motion, screens flickered to life, elevators whispered up and down, and decisions began stacking before the sun fully claimed the sky. "We have the investor showcase tonight," her assistant said, walking beside Evelyn with a tablet in hand. "Press will be there, along with the board and potential partners." Evelyn nodded once. Already calculating, already ahead. "Make sure everything runs exactly on schedule," she replied, her tone precise, because control was not just preference, it was identity, and tonight was not just an event, it was a statement. Across town, the morning unfolded differently, slower, grounded in smaller details that did not need to impress anyone. Marcus stood in his modest kitchen pouring coffee into a chipped mug, the scent warm and familiar, a quiet counterbalance to a world that rarely slowed down. "Are you coming to the school thing tonight?" Lily asked, sitting at the table with her homework spread out, her voice hopeful but careful. Marcus glanced at the clock, then at her. "What time?" he asked, already knowing the answer mattered more than his schedule. 6:30, she said. "They are showing our projects." He smiled faintly, a soft shift in his expression. "Then I will be there," he answered simply, because for him, promises were not negotiations, they were commitments. The day stretched forward, carrying both of them into completely different worlds that were about to collide again in ways neither of them expected. By early evening, the city lights began to flicker on, one by one, like a quiet signal that something was about to happen, and inside the grand ballroom on the 32nd floor, everything was polished to perfection, crystal glasses aligned, soft music drifting through the air, conversations measured and strategic. "This is where we set the tone," Evelyn said to a group of executives, her voice confident, controlled, the room naturally aligning itself around her presence, because power does not need to raise its volume when it is already understood. At the same time, just outside the building, a delivery truck pulled up near the service entrance, its engine humming low, unnoticed by most. Marcus stepped out, adjusting his jacket, a clipboard in hand, a temporary contract job, nothing permanent, nothing prestigious, just another way to keep moving forward. "You are here for the event supplies?" the security guard asked, barely looking up. "Yes," Marcus replied, calm, steady, his voice carrying no urgency, because he did not need recognition to do what needed to be done. He signed the form, picked up the crates, and moved through the back corridors where the shine of the main hall did not reach, where the floors were functional instead of flawless, where people worked without being seen. Inside, laughter rose gently, glasses clinked, deals began forming in quiet corners, and Evelyn moved through it all with effortless control, greeting investors, guiding conversations, shaping outcomes. "This is the future," she said at one point, gesturing toward a digital display. "Efficiency, precision, leadership." The words landed well, they always did, because she knew how to speak in ways that built certainty, but certainty has a way of hiding what has not yet been revealed. In the service hallway, Marcus set down a crate, pausing for a brief second, just enough to steady his breath, just enough to adjust the weight of the day. Then he continued forward, unaware that just beyond the next set of doors, the woman whose life he had saved, the woman who had dismissed him without a second thought, was standing at the center of a room that was about to fall completely silent, not because of power, not because of money, but because truth has a way of arriving at exactly the moment no one is prepared for. The ballroom shimmered with controlled elegance, the kind that made every movement feel intentional, every word measured, and at the center of it all stood Evelyn Carter, composed, confident, completely in command. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice carrying effortlessly across the room. "Tonight is not just about growth, it is about vision." A few nods followed, quiet approval from people who understood the language of power, who measured success in numbers and projections, Not moments or meaning, and as she spoke, the doors at the back opened briefly. Unnoticed by most, just another staff member entering, just another figure blending into the background. Marcus stepped inside with a crate balanced in his hands, moving along the edge of the room where attention did not linger, his steps steady, unhurried, because he had long learned how to exist without needing to be seen. Place those by the service table, a coordinator whispered, barely glancing at him. He nodded once and continued, the soft hum of conversation washing over him like distant waves, familiar, detached, irrelevant. Efficiency is not about speed, Evelyn continued, pacing slowly. It is about clarity, about knowing what matters and removing what does not. The words landed with precision, reinforcing the image she had built, the identity she protected, and then, as if drawn by something she could not yet explain, her eyes shifted briefly toward the side of the room, just a flicker, just a moment, and there he was, not framed by importance, not introduced. Just standing there adjusting a crate, the same worn jacket, the same quiet presence, and for a fraction of a second, something inside her paused. She did not react immediately, she did not break stride, because control does not falter in front of an audience, but the recognition was there, subtle, incomplete, like a memory just out of reach. Marcus turned slightly, lifting the crate into place, unaware of the attention that had brushed past him, unaware that the woman at the center of the room was looking at him not as a stranger, but as a question she had not yet answered. Is everything all right? One of the investors asked. Noticing the brief hesitation, Evelyn smiled smoothly, the moment already sealed behind composure. Of course, she replied, her tone unchanged, her posture flawless, because moments like that were not allowed to exist in her world. They were corrected, dismissed, controlled. She stepped down from the platform, moving through the crowd, greeting guests, shaking hands, every gesture practiced, every interaction deliberate, until she reached the service table where Marcus stood finishing his task, and this time, there was no distance, no glass wall, no passing glance. You, she said, not loudly, but with a sharp clarity that cut through the surrounding noise. Marcus looked up slowly, meeting her gaze without surprise, without discomfort, just calm recognition. We met yesterday, she continued, her tone shifting slightly, not softer but more focused, as if she was trying to place him within a structure that made sense. At the intersection, he replied simply, offering the truth without emphasis, without expectation. A brief silence settled between them. Not heavy but noticeable, like a pause in music that makes the next note matter more. You left, she said, almost as a statement, almost as a question. Marcus gave a small nod. There was nothing else to do, he answered, and that was the part that did not align, not with her world, not with her understanding of how people operated. You should have stayed, she said, a faint edge returning to her voice. There are procedures, reports, recognition. Marcus shook his head once, not dismissive, not defiant, just clear. I am not looking for recognition, he said, and again the room did not react. The conversations continued, the glasses clinked, but something in that exchange shifted, something subtle but undeniable, because for the first time that night, the balance between them was not defined by status or setting. It was defined by something quieter, something harder to control, and Evelyn, for all her precision, could not quite place it. The air between them did not break, it thin, stretched, as if the room itself was waiting to decide what this moment meant. You are not looking for recognition, Evelyn repeated, her voice low, measured, as though testing the weight of the idea. Then what exactly are you looking for? Marcus adjusted the edge of the crate, his movements unhurried, grounded in something that did not need explanation. Nothing, he said simply, and that answer landed differently than any argument could have. Because it removed the rules she was used to playing by, it erased the transaction she expected, and in doing so it left her without control. Everyone wants something, she replied, a faint edge returning, not sharp but defensive, like a structure reinforcing itself. Not always, Marcus answered, meeting her gaze without challenge, without submission, just presence, and for a brief second, the noise of the room seemed to dim around them, not because people stopped talking, but because something quieter demanded attention. A voice from across the room called out, Evelyn, the board is ready. She glanced away, just long enough to re-anchor herself, to return to the version of control she trusted. I will be there in a moment, she replied, then turned back to him, her posture straightening slightly, the shift almost invisible. If you are still working here tonight, she said, make sure you follow proper channels. The words sounded like instruction, but beneath them was something unresolved, Something she had not yet named. Marcus gave a small nod, not agreement, not resistance, just acknowledgement. I always do what needs to be done, he said, and then he stepped past her, moving back toward the service corridor, leaving behind no impression except the absence of expectation. Inside the main hall, the presentation resumed, screens lit up with projections, numbers climbed in neat graphs, and Evelyn stood once again at the front, composed, precise, delivering outcomes instead of questions. But something in her timing had shifted, just slightly, just enough that those who knew her well might have noticed. A half-second pause here. A breath held a fraction longer there. Nothing obvious, nothing that could be pointed out, but enough to suggest that control, while still intact, was no longer absolute. As you can see, she continued, gesturing toward the display, our projections for the next quarter exceed expectations. A few nods followed, quiet approval, the rhythm of the room returning, but then from the side of the hall, a technician approached one of the staff members, whispering urgently, not loudly, not disruptively, but enough to ripple through the edges of the room. Is there an issue? One investor asked, glancing toward the disturbance. Just a minor delay. Someone replied quickly, but the technician moved closer, speaking again, and this time, the words reached someone who mattered. We found the security footage from yesterday's intersection, he said quietly. The board requested to include it in the presentation for liability documentation. The staff member hesitated, then nodded because decisions like that were not questioned, they were executed. On the main screen, the polished graphs flickered, paused, then shifted, replaced by grainy footage, time-stamped, distant, unremarkable at first glance, a street corner, a stalled car, people hesitating, stepping back, watching, and then a figure entering the frame, steady, unhurried, moving forward when others did not. The room did not react immediately, because recognition takes time, because truth does not shout, it reveals itself slowly, and Evelyn, standing at the front of the room, felt something in her chest tighten, not from fear, not from confusion, but from the quiet certainty that whatever came next would not be something she could control, because the moment she had already moved past was about to return not as memory but as something everyone could see. The screen flickered once, then steadied, and what had been a room full of quiet confidence shifted into something else entirely, not chaos, not panic, but a subtle unraveling of certainty. What is this? One board member asked under his breath, though no one answered because the answer was already unfolding in front of them. The footage played without sound, grainy but clear enough, a city intersection, a stalled car, figures hesitating at the edges of the frame, stepping back instead of forward, and then, unmistakably, a man moving against that hesitation, steady, deliberate, without pause, without audience, without any sign that he expected to be seen. Evelyn stood still at the front of the room, her hand lowering slowly from where it had been mid-gesture, her voice gone not because she chose silence, but because the moment had taken it from her, and as the figure in the video came closer into view, something inside her aligned with a precision she had never prepared for. The jacket, the posture, the calm way he reached for the door, the same quiet certainty she had dismissed only minutes ago. Is that? Someone began, then stopped because recognition does not need to be spoken to be understood, and across the room near the service corridor Marcus had paused as well, not turning toward the screen immediately, not reacting with urgency, just still, as if he already knew that truth does not rush, it arrives. The footage continued, showing the moment clearly now, the way he opened the door, the way he spoke, the way he stepped back once she was safe. No hesitation, no attempt to linger, no claim, and then he was gone from the frame, just as quietly as he had entered it. The room did not erupt, it did not react with noise, instead it did something far more powerful. It fell completely silent, the kind of silence that does not come from confusion, but from realization. From the sudden awareness that something important had been misunderstood, misjudged, overlooked. Evelyn felt it before she fully processed it, that shift, that absence of sound pressing against her like a weight she could not move. And for the first time in a long time she did not know what to say, not because she lacked words but because none of them fit. Her gaze moved slowly, almost unwillingly, across the room, past the investors, past the board, past the carefully arranged structure of control she had built, until it found him, standing at the edge, not elevated, not introduced, just present, exactly as he had been all along. That is him, someone whispered, not loudly, not dramatically, just enough to confirm what everyone already knew, and the words settled into the silence like a final piece falling into place. Marcus met her gaze for a brief moment, not with accusation, not with expectation, just with the same calm steadiness that had defined him from the beginning, and then, almost as if the moment did not belong to him at all, he lowered his eyes slightly and adjusted the edge of the crate beside him, returning to the task he had been given, because for him, nothing had changed, not his purpose, not his presence, not his need to be seen. But for Evelyn, everything had shifted because the man she had dismissed, the man she had reduced to a line on a report, the man she had tried to pay and then instruct was now standing in front of her not as a question, but as an answer she could no longer avoid, and in that silence, deeper than any argument, clearer than any explanation, the truth finally took its place where control could not reach it. No one moved at first, not because they were unsure, but because the moment demanded stillness, the kind that settles in when something deeper than status has been revealed, and Evelyn Carter, who had built her life on precision, felt that stillness press in from every direction. "Stop the video," she said quietly, not sharply, not with command, but with something unfamiliar, something closer to restraint. The screen faded to black, but the image remained in every mind in the room. She stepped down from the platform slowly, each step measured but no longer effortless, as if the distance between who she had been and who she was becoming could be counted in inches. "Marcus," she said, and this time she used his name not as a label, not as a line on a report, but as recognition, real and unfiltered. The room followed her movement, eyes shifting, attention narrowing, because power had just changed direction. Marcus looked up, not surprised, not defensive, just present. "Yes," he replied. His voice steady, the same calm that had carried him through every moment before this one. And the contrast between them was no longer about position, it was about posture, about what each of them chose to carry into this silence. "You saved my life," she said, not loudly, not dramatically, just truth placed carefully into the space between them. A few people shifted slightly, not out of discomfort but out of awareness. Because words like that do not belong to transactions, they belong to something deeper, something harder to define. Marcus shook his head once gently. "I helped," he said, correcting the scale of it without diminishing the action, because for him it was never about magnitude, it was about doing what was right in the moment, nothing more. Evelyn exhaled slowly, the kind of breath that does not release tension but acknowledges it. "I misjudged you," she continued, her voice steady but quieter now, stripped of the edge it once carried. "I dismissed you and I tried to reduce what you did to something I could pay for." The words did not echo, they settled because they were not meant for performance, they were meant for accountability. The room remained silent, not out of politeness, but because no one wanted to interrupt what was unfolding, not a confrontation, not a defense, but something rarer, something that did not fit into boardroom dynamics. Marcus listened without interruption, his posture unchanged. His hands resting lightly at his sides, not closed, not guarded, just open in the way of someone who does not need to protect himself from truth. "You do not owe me anything," he said after a brief pause, his voice even, without distance, without demand. "You already did what you believed was right at the time." And again that answer shifted the ground beneath the moment, because it removed the expectation of repayment, it removed the structure she understood, leaving only choice. Evelyn studied him for a second, not as a CO assessing value, but as a person trying to understand something she had not encountered before. "What would you have me do now?" she asked, and the question, simple as it was, carried more weight than any decision she had made that day, because it was not about control, it was about direction. Marcus glanced briefly toward the service table, then back at her. "Just see people," he said, the words quiet, almost understated, but they landed with clarity that did not need volume. Not roles, not titles, just people. And in that moment the silence in the room deepened again, not because something was missing, but because something had finally been understood, not fully, not completely, but enough to change what came next. The room did not return to what it had been, not immediately, because some moments do not reset, they redefine, and Evelyn Carter stood there for a second longer than necessary, not because she did not know what to do, but because she understood now that what came next mattered more than anything she had said before. "We will continue," she said finally, her voice steady again but different, not sharper, not louder, just grounded in something that had not been there earlier. The presentation resumed, the numbers returned, the conversations picked up, but the energy had shifted in a way no one could fully explain, because once truth enters a room, it does not leave quietly. Marcus did not stay to watch the rest. He adjusted the last crate, signed off on the delivery sheet, and moved back through the service corridor the same way he had come in, without announcement, without pause, because for him, the moment had already passed, and there were other things that mattered more than being seen in a room that had only just begun to understand him. Outside, the night air carried a softer edge, the city lights stretching across the streets in long reflections, and Marcus checked his watch as he walked. 6:28. He picked up his pace slightly, not rushing, just steady, because he had made a promise, and promises to him were not optional. Inside the ballroom, Evelyn continued speaking, but her words were no longer just about growth or projections. They carried a subtle shift, a recalibration that only those paying close attention could hear. Leadership, she said at one point, pausing briefly, is not only about decisions, it is about perspective. A few people nodded, not fully aware of the weight behind the statement, but sensing that something had changed. Later that evening, after the last guest had left and the lights had dimmed to a quieter glow, Evelyn stood alone by the window. The city spread out beneath her in silent patterns, and for the first time in a long time she allowed herself to stand there without reaching for the next task. Without filling the space with movement, she simply stayed, replaying not the numbers, not the deals, but the moment when everything had shifted, the moment when silence had said more than any argument ever could. Across town, in a small school auditorium filled with folding chairs and handmade posters, Marcus sat in the second row, his jacket draped over the back of his seat, his attention fixed on the small stage where Lily stood holding a piece of paper, her voice a little nervous but steady. "My project is about kindness," she said, glancing up at the audience, her eyes finding him for a second, and he gave a small nod, a quiet reassurance that did not need words, because some support is felt, not spoken. And as she continued, explaining how small actions can change someone's day, the room listened in the way people do when something simple carries truth. Marcus did not think about the ballroom or the screen or the silence that had followed. He listened to his daughter, present, grounded, exactly where he needed to be, and in that moment there was no contrast between who he was and what he did, because they were the same. Back in the tower, Evelyn reached for her phone, then paused, not out of uncertainty but out of intention. She lowered it again, choosing not to call, not to correct, not to turn the moment into something transactional, because she understood now that some things are not fixed with gestures, they are changed with time, with attention, with a different way of seeing. She looked out at the city. Once more the reflection of her own face faint in the glass, no longer just the image of control but something quieter, something more aware. And somewhere beyond the lights in the distance, a man walked home with his daughter, not needing recognition, not needing applause, because the kind of strength that changes people does not announce itself, it simply stands there steady and quiet, until the world is ready to understand it. In this deeply emotional journey, a struggling single dad crosses paths with a powerful female CEO in a moment that changes both their lives forever. What begins as a quiet act of courage unfolds into one of those rare touching stories that reveal the true meaning of dignity and grace. While the single father asks for nothing and walks away in silence, the female executive is forced to confront her own assumptions when the truth emerges in a room full of power and status. This is one of those unforgettable, touching stories where humility speaks louder than authority, and where kindness leaves a lasting impact. As the story unfolds, viewers will experience touching stories filled with emotional justice, quiet strength, and second chances. The contrast between wealth and simplicity creates one of the most compelling, touching stories that resonates deeply with anyone who believes in doing good without recognition. Ultimately, this is more than a narrative. It is one of those timeless, touching stories that remind us that real strength is not seen in power, but in the quiet choices we make when no one is watching. If you think this story is over, it's not. Subscribe. There's more to come.